Good to be here with you this morning. I wish you could see your faces. That way I get a sense of what I'm saying, what you're hearing, and I like that energy. It goes back and forth. But this is the next best thing. So anyway, what we're going to talk about today is I think you're going to, if you've listened to the whole thing so far, it's going to begin to bring it all together. And I think it's going to begin to help you understand a lot of what's going on inside of you today as a man. So with that in mind, let's get started again. Our purpose for this series, AHM CORE, is to call us as men back to a life that is centered in God. God created everything and he created us to revolve around him. And so the problem though is ever since the fall, man has in essence replaced God at the center, and we put ourselves at the center. And when we put ourselves at the center, everything revolves around us. We understand everything, everything has meaning and purpose as it revolves around us. And if we believe in a God, then that God also revolves around us, and he in essence becomes our vending machine. And we put in the correct spiritual change, pull the lever, and we understand that we should get what we want because we are at the center and God revolves around us as everything else does. And what we're saying is that this is a corrupted view of reality, that this view of reality doesn't bring flourishing, it doesn't bring life. It brings pain, it brings confusion, it brings a sense of hopelessness. It ultimately brings death because we cannot create a universe around which everything revolves around us. And so what we're about is calling men back to a life centered in God so that everything that we encounter, everything that we see, including understanding ourselves, understanding the meaning of life, even understanding and having a sense of direction in regards to all this unrest, this social unrest that's going on, it revolves around God at the center. And by the way, one of the questions that you asked last time had to do with this. And I really wasn't prepared. I knew what I wanted to say, but I wasn't really ready to say it. And so what I'm planning on doing is writing something out in regards to how should we as men move into this chaos? What will it look like to deal with this chaos in order to bring order and beauty in life? And there's some things that we need to say, there's some things that we need to understand. But the one thing that we do need to do is not be passively compliant. We need to listen, we need to watch, we need to understand, we need to pray, and we need to enter into this chaos, not looking to fix things as we saw last time, but rather in terms of what will it look like to bring God into the midst of this, who is about loving our neighbor as ourselves, who is about making all things order and beauty and life, which is the opposite of what we see happening today. So I want to put something together like that, and we'll let you know how you can get that. So the series consists of two parts. Number one, part one, weeks 1 through 3, and we saw this as our purpose as men. Our purpose: men are dependent creatures created to live for the glory of God. Another way to put it is this: we're made to worship. We will worship God or anything that we see as God because at our core, we were made to worship. We can't get away from that. Second, part 2, weeks 4 through 6, we saw our mission as men. And what we saw here and are seeing here is men are male image bearers designed to reflect God's power. As such, we were built to bless. So we were made to worship. We were built to bless. Now, last Friday, we began part 2, week 4. And we began to look at this whole thing of the design of the masculine soul. Who are we really at the deepest parts of us? And do the deepest parts of us reflect who we are as men on the outside? And what we're saying, in essence, is who we are on the outside as men is reflected on who we are on the outside. The inside the body is a parable of the soul. The male body is a parable of the soul. The body says something about the design of the soul. And one of the things we saw is that men are built to bless, and how men bless has to do with how men have been designed. And we saw that the essence of masculinity, the essence of who we are as men, is movement. And we also then saw that movement, masculine movement, is not about fixing things. It's about entering in. It's about being present. It's about reflecting God in the chaos. And then thirdly, we said, then what does good masculine movement look like? We said that it's displaying the warrior poet. A warrior moves with courage. A poet moves with a sense of imagination. There's something bigger going on than I can see. And so the poet sees not through his eyes, but through faith. Now, today we want to begin with a question as we begin week 5. And it follows from last time. If men were made to move, as we saw last time, then why do we too often feel paralyzed and unable to move? Why is it that we as men it's much easier to be passively compliant than it is to move forward and engage the chaos? Why is that? Well, the proposed answer that we want to really give throughout our whole time today is simply this. It has to do with the state of the masculine soul. If the design of the masculine soul is that we were made to bless, why is it that we have a hard time? Well, it has to do with the state of our soul right now. And the state of our soul is this. Men are confused and afraid. And what we want to do is we want to see why we are confused and afraid. And what we're going to see is this. Men are confused and afraid because of the legacy of Adam, goes back to Genesis 3, failed masculine movement, and then how that legacy has impacted men in the firstborn of Adam, the way of Cain, which we're going to see is bad masculine movement. So the state of the soul, we're confused and afraid. Why? It has to do with the legacy of Adam and the way of Cain. Okay? So with that in mind, let's begin. The legacy of Adam. What is the legacy of Adam? As I said, it goes back to Genesis 3, and so let's set the story. And it begins with the serpent. Genesis 1 and 2, God creates everything, everything is good, and now comes the serpent. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, and he said to the woman, has God really said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? Now guys, remember, he goes to the woman and he's asking this question because the woman never heard what God said. When God told Adam, you shall not eat of any tree except this one, or you can eat of any tree except this one here, the woman didn't hear that because the woman hadn't been created yet. It was Adam's responsibility to tell the woman. So when the serpent comes here, he's in essence, he's saying, has God really said that? I mean, after all, you didn't hear it. You just heard it secondhand. Maybe Adam didn't get it right, is the idea here. And so the woman says to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. I mean, that's what Adam told me. But from the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you shall not eat or touch it, lest you die. Okay. Well, the serpent then responds to the woman and says, you shall not die. Again, deception. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, what's going on here? Well, this is the return of chaos. You say, well, what do you mean, the return of chaos? Well, remember in Genesis 1, God dispels chaos to create shalom. And what is shalom? Shalom is the way life should be. It's the way life functions and flourishes in an environment of order, beauty, and life. So God dispels chaos to create shalom. Chapter 2, God then designs the man, Adam, to protect the shalom, the order, beauty, and life. And Genesis 3, the chaos of Genesis 1 returns to threaten shalom. And because God had put Adam there to protect the shalom, When the chaos returns and threatens the shalom, what was Adam to do? Well, Adam was to act like a man, move into the chaos, and protect it and protect God's shalom. Now, what is the chaos here? The chaos is the serpent. And the reason I say the serpent, because in the ancient Near Eastern culture of that day, the serpent symbolized chaos. So when chapter 3 starts out, now the serpent, what the author is saying is the chaos is returning, and what's going to happen? Well, what we see is he goes to the woman because she didn't hear the prohibition from the very beginning, and he confuses her, and then he deceives her, with, and this becomes the threat. And the threat to shalom is this: God can be replaced. That's what he's telling the woman. You can put yourself at the center and put God on the outside, even if you want to keep God. Whatever it is, if God is there, he can revolve around you. If he's not there, you are the center, and everything now revolves around you. That whole idea of replacing the center with ourselves began in the garden. It's nothing new. So this is the context in which Adam is now put. And the question is, Adam, how are you going to respond as a man? Well, what's his response? Next verse, chapter 3, verse 6. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it, and she also gave to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Now, I want you to notice a couple of things. First of all, notice Adam, where is Adam? Adam, it says, is with her. And the word with is the Hebrew word hama, meaning beside her. In other words, he's not just with her in the garden someplace on the back 40. He is right there standing alongside her, watching this whole thing go down. And what is his response? Does he act to protect the shalom from the threat of chaos? What does he do? Well, he eats. In other words, he is passively compliant. He just watches the thing, does nothing, says nothing, and he complies. Oh, that sounds good, I'll eat. In other words, this is what I want you to see. We have the man's design. He was designed to be present, but Adam's response is he is absent. He's there, but he's not there. The man was designed to move in chaos, but what's Adam's response? He's passive. The man was designed to speak into confusion, which the chaos brought, but Adam is silent. The man was created and designed to protect God's shalom, but what does he do? He serves himself. The man was designed to remember God. The Hebrew word that's used, he was made male and female, is zakar, can be translated male, or it can be translated the remembering one. And as such, Adam was told by God, this is what it looks like to live in my garden. He heard God's word, and he was to pass that on to Eve and to his family and to his descendants. He was designed to remember God, but in the moment, Adam forgets God. It's as if God doesn't even exist. I want you to notice something, guys. The typical complaint today about men is this: they're absent, they're passive, they're silent, they're self-serving, and they forget God. That all began in the garden. So that's Adam's response to the chaos. He's silent, he's passive, he's compliant. He fails to live out his design, in other words. He fails to move as a man. So what's God's response to Adam? Well, after pronouncing judgment on the serpent and then on the woman, God then in Genesis 3:17 through 19 pronounces a specific judgment on the man. It has to do with his masculinity. Watch what he says. Then he said then to Adam, God said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, the idea is instead of me, you knew what I said, but you forgot what I said, and you just compliantly went along with your wife, and have eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat. Cursed is the ground because of you. Why the ground? Well, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life, both thorns and thistles it will grow from you. For you, it's going to be hard. And how is it going to be hard? Well, and you shall eat of the plants of the field. The idea here is that you had the garden here, you could eat anything. Now you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to work for it. In fact, as you work for it, by the sweat of your face, you shall eat bread. It isn't going to be easy till you return to the ground. Cursed is the ground, and it's going to work against you till the day you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust shall you be subdued. It's interesting. What was the mission of the man? The mission of the man was to subdue the earth, to subdue the ground. What's the ground going to do? In the end, the ground is now going to subdue the man. The man is going to lose. So what is all of this? Well, this is talionic justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. What you sow, you reap. That's what's going on here. God responds to Adam's failure to move as a man, watch now, guys, by making masculine movement difficult. And where was man to move? He was to move into the world. And where is this difficulty in movement going to take place? In the world. Why? Because everything about the world is now going to be changed. Watch. Prior to God's pronouncement, the ground was man's ally, right? The ground worked with the man. Nature responded to his movement. He planted a seed and watered it, and it grew, and the sun came out, and it made everything he needed for life. Everything worked with him. And as a result, masculine movement in the world was satisfying and fulfilling. It felt good to be a man. Everything worked the way it was supposed to work. Shalom. After God's pronouncement, the ground is no longer man's enemy, ally. The ground is now man's enemy, in that the ground works against the man. He's going to suffer. He's going to toil. He's going to sweat. Nature pushes back against the man as he plants. Instead of the flower or the plant coming up, weeds come up. The birds come and take the seed away. There's no rain. There's no sun. As he's plowing the field, his plow hits a stone, and the stone breaks. And as the plow breaks, and as a result, masculine movement is now frustrating, and it's exhausting, and it's difficult now to be a man in this world. In other words, because Adam failed as a man, let's get the big picture here again, God judged Adam where Adam would most deeply feel it as a man. And where? In his masculine movement. Why that? Because the essence of the masculinity is movement. Men are made to move. And as a result, the world that was once made masculine movement satisfying and good, it felt good to move, is now going to make it intimidating. Do I have what it takes? And exhausting. It is just so hard. Guys, this is the legacy of Adam. The legacy of Adam is that makes masculinity difficult and hard, is a broken and hostile world that opposes the masculine mission, We were made to subdue, and it's an enemy, and it's gonna work against us to subdue us. It threatens masculine movement. It pushes back, and it calls into question masculine power. And guys, all of this has been passed down to Adam's sons. All of this has been passed down to us. And as a result, it's deeply rooted in your soul and my soul. It's the painful reality of this. I am inadequate in this world to make it work. I don't have what it takes to be a man. That is rooted in every soul of every man. And as such, there's a shame to that realization, because the shame says, I can't be what I was created to be. And it subtly shapes every man's story. It shapes your story, the legacy of Adam, and it shapes my story, in that the shameful experiences of our lives throughout the course of our life, of being inadequate. I was inadequate here as a boy. I was inadequate here, and I was inadequate here. And all these shameful experiences shape our stories, so that our story is about, I must hide those inadequate parts of my life. And as Adam felt the shame of inadequacy in chapter 3, when he went and he hid behind fig leaves, guys, we have been hiding ever since. We create our own fig leaves, and our story is populated by fig leaves. And so this is passed down to all of us. It's in every one of our souls. We can't get rid of it. It has to do with the reality that we don't have what it takes to be a man in this world, because the world no longer cooperates. It works against us, and it shapes our story. We begin to see life. We begin to experience life. We begin to see ourselves based on the shameful experiences of inadequacy. So what have we seen? We are made to move, but we struggle to move. Why? It has to do with the state of our masculine soul. And what's the state of the soul? We are confused and afraid as men. And where does that confusion and fear come from? It comes from the legacy of Adam, but it also comes from what we're going to see to be called the way of Cain. Now, what's this? Well, in Jude chapter 1, verse 11, Jude says this: woe to them, for they have gone the way of Cain. The way of Cain. What's the way of Cain? Well, whatever it is, Jude is warning us, don't go the way of Cain. It's a warning not to go in this direction. But the question is, what is the way of Cain? Well, to find out what the way of Cain is, we have to ask this question: who is Cain? What did Cain do? And why is what Cain did something to avoid? Why is it a warning? So let's see if we can figure out what the way of Cain is that we're warned not to go down. Well, if you know the story of Cain, you know that Cain is Adam's firstborn son. And so let's look at the story in Genesis 4. Genesis 4, let me just set the scene, where we pick up here, happens right after Cain murders his brother Abel. Okay, so God now is coming to Cain to deal with what Cain had just done to his brother. And so the Lord said to Cain, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. From now on, you will be a homeless fugitive, constantly wandering from place to place. In other words, because of what you've done, you're going to be a wanderer. Cain replies to the Lord, my punishment is too great for me to bear. I can't handle this. All who see me will try to kill me. Then the Lord replied, they will not kill you, for I will give 7 times your punishment to anyone who does. In fact, in the story here, I don't include all of it, God puts a mark on Cain that is a warning against anyone that would seek to harm him. And so after putting that mark and making this promise, Cain left the Lord's presence, and he settled in the land of Nod. east of Eden, and Cain built a city, and he named it Enoch. Now, what happens? Cain kills his brother, and Cain builds a city. Those are the two things that's going on here. Now, what does all this mean? Well, let's kind of look at this again. Because Cain abused his power when he killed his brother, and in killing his brother, he destroyed community, he destroyed relationship, he destroyed family. Because he destroyed community through his abuse of power as a man, Cain would now be denied the blessing, the goodness, the shalom, the life-giving nature of community. Cain doesn't like that. So Cain complains to God that without the security of community, what's going to happen to him? Well, somebody's going to come along and he is going to kill him. He's going to suffer. It's not safe to live apart from community. So God, you can't do this to me. How does God respond? Well, God responds by reaffirming his punishment. You are going to continue to be a wanderer, Cain. I'm not going to change my mind, but I will do something for you. I will protect your life, and I'll put a mark on it, and so that people know that if you harm Cain, you are going to suffer punishment 7 times than what Cain suffered. And so Cain is happy and he goes his way, right? Well, rather than trusting God as a wanderer in a hostile world, Cain ignores God. He settles down and he builds a city. Guys, this is the way of Cain. The way of Cain is using our own resources to protect ourselves from a hostile, broken world. Why? So that we won't have to desperately trust God. Cain was going to have to desperately trust God in a broken world. And he says, I will build a city. I will trust my own resources. That's the way of Cain. The way of Cain is trusting our own means to manage our lives and to subdue our fears. Why? Again, so we won't have to desperately trust God. The way of Cain is depending on our own power to escape the legacy of Adam. And what's the legacy of Adam? A broken world that doesn't work and exposes that we aren't enough. And we depend on our own power to escape the legacy of Adam. Why? Again, so we won't have to desperately trust God. Guys, this is the way of Cain, and Jude says, don't go that way. Why not, Jude? Why not go the way of Cain? Maybe a better way to ask it is this. What happens when you and I don't heed the warning? What happens when a man goes the way of Cain and he begins to depend on his own resources? He begins to build his own city so that he doesn't have to trust God. The answer? When we go the way of Cain, and it joins then with the legacy of Adam, it produces in each of us an uncomfortable bind. There's just something going on that we can't get away from. We're in a bind. And what's the bind? Well, let's see how it works, first of all. First, the legacy of Adam that we're all part of exposes our souls to the reality of our inadequacy as men in a hostile, broken world where nothing works, right? That's the legacy of Adam, Genesis 3. When that combines with the way of Cain directs our hearts to disregard God and trust our own resources to manage the legacy of Adam, Genesis 4. When those two things come together, there's a problem. And what's the problem? The moment we depend on our own resources to manage life, we go the way of Cain. We are exposed to the reality that's rooted in every one of our souls. I don't have what it takes to be a man in this fallen, broken, hostile world, the legacy of Adam. When those two come together, the way of Cain and the legacy of Adam, it produces this uncomfortable bind. And here's the bind. I must be adequate, but I can't be adequate. I have to be powerful, but I won't be powerful enough. I have to know what to do, but I don't know what to do. That's the bind. I must be adequate as a man, but I'm not adequate as a man. Guys, when we go the way of Cain, it combines with the legacy of Adam, and it produces this bind in us. I must be adequate, but I can't be adequate. Now, we can't live with a bind. It's uncomfortable, and we're always going to try to find a way to get out of it. And there are four things that men do to get relief from this bind. Four things that you do, four things that I do. Here it is. Number one, we will avoid any area where we could be exposed as inadequate. And one area where we as men are often easily exposed as inadequate are in relationships. In relationships where we need to be open, where we need to be honest, where we need to be vulnerable, where we need to deal with conflict, we will avoid those places because those are relationships are one place that we are exposed as not enough. But we will not just avoid, we will compensate for our inadequacy by finding places where we know what to do as men, where we feel adequate, where we feel powerful, such as hobbies and careers. Third, we will seek out places where rest is always available and we never have to toil, where we never have to sweat. Such places are fantasy, whether it's porn, whether it's binge watching the Netflix, fantasy. Pleasure, whether it's sex, whether it's food, numbing, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whatever it is, we will seek out places of rest because it's exhausting to be a man. It's exhausting to always have to work and all you get is thorns and thistles. And so we look for a place of rest and where we never have to toil and sweat. A fourth thing we do is we will look to make people pay, to punish those who threaten to expose our inadequacy by requiring us to be men. And how we punish people, guys, are by anger and all the expressions of anger, or by withdrawal, all the expressions of withdrawal. We'll attack or we will isolate. That's how we punish people. So avoid, competence, seek out places, punish. All ways we seek to find relief from the bind. I must be adequate, but I'm not adequate. And what happens when we go in this direction? Well, good masculine movement stops. And what's good masculine movement? Movement of a warrior with courage and a poet with imagination. And bad masculine movement begins. We will move as a man because that's what we're made to do, but it's not the kind of movement with courage and imagination that blesses. It does something else. Why? Because it's bad movement. Well, what is this bad masculine movement? There's two kinds. First, there's movement without courage, which is the opposite of moving with warrior courage, right? And movement without courage is what we're going to call the jerk. The jerk moves without courage. Then there's movement without imagination, which is the opposite of moving with poetic imagination, seeing something bigger. And this we might categorize as the wimp. So the opposite of the warrior is the jerk. The opposite of the poet is the wimp. Now, let's look at each one of these. First of all, movement without courage. A jerk will move always without risk or trust in God. Remember we said last time that if we're going to move with courage, courage always requires risk. And this guy moves, the jerk moves, but he never moves when there's risk. And why does he move when there's no risk? Because he only moves when the outcome is guaranteed. If I know what the outcome is going to be, then I will move. That doesn't take courage because there's no risk involved. And how does the jerk know that his outcome is guaranteed? Well, a lot of times by misusing his power to force desired outcomes. I know what's going to happen when I deal with this conflict with my spouse or with my friend, because I'm going to use my power to force the outcome. And so that takes no courage because there's no risk. I am going to force the outcome by the misuse of my power. And how does he misuse that power? Through vehicles of aggression, through intimidation, through domination. And the message that a woman gets from a jerk is this: I don't need you. This is the man saying this to the woman. This is what the jerk says to the woman in essence. I don't need you, but I will use you. And the effect on the woman is this: she feels unwanted, devalued, alone, and unloved. What about the movement without imagination? A wimp moves always without seeing beyond himself to something bigger. He's moving, but he has no imagination. And he only moves in ways to protect himself and find relief, not to bless others. The movement is always self-centered. It's always with his eyes on himself, never out to something bigger. And one of the ways he does this is not by misusing power as the jerk, but the wimp misuses kindness or niceness to manipulate others to meet his needs. If he's nice, how could anybody not give him what he's want? If he's nice, how could anybody not require or to require more of him as a man? He's just such a nice guy. And he misuses his kindness through vehicles of neediness, through vehicles of victimization. He's just a victim. You just got to understand him. You can't require anything of him. And shaming. If you don't come through for him, man, I'm going to make you feel guilty, and I'm going to make you feel ashamed that there's something wrong with you, that you did not meet my needs. After all, I've been so nice and been so kind. The message this gives to the woman is this: woman, don't require anything from me. You must take care of me. And when a woman hears that message, she feels pressure to be strong. I got to be strong for this man, which makes the man then feel more like a boy than a man. And he's okay with that. And there's a part of him that's not okay with that. And guilt, a woman feels guilt when she fails to meet the needs of that man. I could have done more. I should have done something more. Why? Because he's so needy. He's such a nice guy. I got to come through for him. That's movement without imagination. And now neither one of us are complete wimps or complete jerks. There's a continuum here of bad masculine movement. And again, a wimp is movement without imagination. It perverts kindness, and it's all about neediness. On the other hand, the jerk is movement without courage. He perverts power, and his demeanor is all about hardness. And in between, there are different points on this continuum. From the genesis of marriage, I have the categories little boy, nice boy, busy boy, and macho boy. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about those categories, I think we either have those on our website. If not, we can make sure that we are able to get them from you. Kelly can help us do that. So that's the continuum. And every one of us, when we go the way of Cain and it combines with the legacy of Adam, it produces this bad masculine movement, jerk or wimp. Now, I want you to note something here. When bad masculine movement directs a man's steps, it's movement without imagination and movement without courage. It's then that bad passions will begin to rule in a man's heart. And there are three kinds of passions that will begin to rule in your heart and my heart as we begin to move in the steps of bad movement. Number one, I must know what to do. Number two, passion, it fills our heart, it energizes our heart. I must protect something fragile. And number three, I must find relief. I must know what to do. I must protect something fragile. I must find relief. Let's look at these. First, bad passion. I must know what to do. Now, what this is about is this, in essence, is the energy that lives in our hearts. It says this: life must be predictable, manageable, and controllable. I must find a rule to make my life work, a formula or a principle, whether it's a principle of life, whether it's a biblical principle, whether it's a spiritual principle, whatever it is. I got to find a principle, a rule, a formula that I can know, that I can always do, and my life will turn out this way. Life is predictable and manageable because I got the formula. And this passion causes us to see God as a vending machine. God must be cooperative and manageable. If I follow the right formulas and rules that have to do with the Christian life, then God must cooperate. And if he doesn't, then he must be discarded. I must know what to do. Now, because we don't always know what to do, that produces something in us, a sense of vulnerability, a sense of something fragile. And what we then do is this: I must protect something fragile. When life is unmanageable, the shameful reality of our inadequacy is fully exposed and felt. In other words, when I can't make life work, when things are overwhelming me, man, that is when I am most exposed to the reality that I am inadequate as a man in this world. And this shameful reality fills you and I as men with both terror. What am I going to do? And rage. I'm mad that the world doesn't work the way I want it to. Especially we have the terror and rage when somebody requires us to be a man. I need you to step up and be a man. That is when we feel the terror. That is when we feel the rage. And such terror and rage moves us to protect that part of us that feels most vulnerable, that feels most fragile in us as a man. I must know what to do, and I must protect something fragile. Third, I got to find relief. I got to find relief. To get relief from the legacy of Adam, a broken world that we can't fix because we're not adequate to do so, we will use and take from others rather than bless them. Such relief seeking turns us away from God, who feels trivial and irrelevant. In other words, when I begin to feed on people instead of depend on God, I depend on people to get relief, to make my life feel better, whether it's by dominating them or being a vampire and sucking the life from them. I no longer need God. God is just trivial and he's irrelevant to that need. He doesn't meet those needs. And I began seeking relief by turning us towards masculine perversions. And what I want to see is there's a couple kinds of masculine perversions. First, there are power perversions. A power perversion is in essence a warrior without poetry, a warrior without poetry. And that means he has no imagination to see beyond himself. He uses his power only for himself. And in using it for himself to fill that void within, he uses power to destroy by conquest, intimidation, anger, and violence. Jesus calls this way of relating, this energy on the inside, this perversion on the inside, this power perversion, murder. The second one is pleasure perversions. Pleasure perversions is a poet without warrior spirit. And by that I mean he has no courage to risk, thus he always plays it safe. He moves, but he's always taking care of himself. He uses his imagination not to see something bigger, but to hide through fantasy and pleasure and numbing. And in this, Jesus calls this not murder, he calls this lust. And this, in essence, the power perversion is that of the jerk. The pleasure perversion is that of the wimp. And so what have we seen today, guys? We began with a question. If, as we saw last time, week 4, men are made to move, that masculinity is all about movement, then why is it that we as men struggle to move? Well, what we sought to say today, the answer to that question is this. It has to do with the state of the masculine soul. Men are confused and afraid. But why are men confused and afraid? Why is that the state of our soul? Well, it goes back to Genesis 3, the legacy of Adam, which is about the shame of inadequacy. We are no longer adequate to be men who make the world work. The world now works against us, and we can't live out our design as we were designed, and so we feel shame. I can't be the man that I am required to be, and more important, that I want to be. Well, the legacy of Adam combines with the way of Cain. I'm going to still try to manage my inadequacy. I'm not adequate, but I have to be adequate. That puts us in a bind that produces bad movement of a jerk instead of a warrior, no courage. It's the movement of a wimp instead of a poet, no imagination. He doesn't see beyond himself. And that also then produces bad passions. I must know what to do. I must protect something fragile, and I must find relief. And the way I find relief, 2 ways: power perversions and pleasure perversions. Guys, this is the state of our soul. As much as we want to be adequate, we're not. And as much as we want to see and to move into things, we're confused and afraid. And there's nothing we can do about it in ourselves. If we can't change our world, we can't change ourselves. And so then the question is this: is there hope for men today? Men were made to move, to make a difference in this world, to move with courage, to reflect the life-giving power of God that creates environments of order, beauty, and life. And if there's ever a day, if there's ever a time that the world needed men, not compliant, passive, silent men, but men who move with courage and strength, truth and love into these places, to dispel the chaos, to bring order, beauty, life, where people can flourish. If it's ever a time we needed men, it's today. And so the question is there hope that we could become such men? Well, come back next time and we're going to look. Hope for the masculine soul. And what we're going to see is this: you and I as men can be restored to what God designed us to be so that we can make a difference. We were built to bless. And when we do what we were made to do, bless, that's when men make a difference in this world. Well, I hope you're able to take that in, begin to process it, and begin to use it for today. Thanks for joining, Steve.
Hey, Scott, sorry, I had to unmute myself there. Thank you very much for the teaching today. I, for one, am going to have to go back and watch it again because there were a lot of things that stood out to me. And with managing the tech side of things, it was too much for me to take my own notes. So I want to go back and rewatch this. And that's just a reminder for those that want to rewatch it. So 2 things I want to hit on before we jump into questions. And the first one is that the AHM CORE teaching manual regarding this content. And this is a reminder, we've had a few questions after the events and even during the events for the slides from this presentation, and this core teaching manual will cover all of that. So this is a professionally published document, of a book that you will be able to order on June 9th. I went back in time a little bit there. So on June 19th, I should say, you'll be able to get this manual, get my facts straight. and you'll be able to read through that. So that's all the content that's in here. I am anxiously waiting for this. I know our group is going to be using it as well. If you have questions about that, you can find out on our website. You can also find out through our social media platforms, Facebook, and here on YouTube. And then the last thing is regarding support for AHM. Support what you love or it goes away. That's a very common phrase around AHM, and I think it's common for anything. For organizations that are 501c nonprofit who are simply trying to put a message out into the world, support is how that's done. If you have the ability to support AHM, please go to AHM4 Life or AHM4.life. That's the website. So again, it's AHM4, the number 4.life. And then you will find a way to supply some resources to AHM, to donate to the organization, and just support as AHM continues to try to reach men with the message of the gospel. So thank you guys so much for that in advance. Anything that you can do obviously helps. And then just to jump into some questions, Scott, there were not a lot of questions today. There were a lot of confirmations and things that popped up. And so I thought that, I would share one for myself. I mean, I've been in the scripture my pretty much my entire adult life since I found Christ, and I've taught it for 20 years to teens. And sometimes, the little small core things, which is what teaching is about, slips through the cracks, and you just don't realize how long the issues of a man's heart have been the issues of a man's heart. So I appreciated that reminder that it's an age-old issue, and that I don't have to feel alone in that. One of the questions, so thank you for that. Ken Burt asked, actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, Ken. What's the best way to allow us to clearly see these things in ourselves?
Well, I think obviously, first of all, through prayer, asking God to show us. The problem with us is that, we are biased in regards to ourselves. And we're either going to see ourselves as all good, there's nothing really wrong. And if there is, well, or we're all bad, which isn't true. And, Paul in Romans says that we're to see ourselves as we really are. And again, the problem is if you're biased against yourself, you're not going to see yourself as you really are. And so that becomes, the necessity of doing things like you said here, Steve, getting that book and going through it as men together who have, having men in your life, like you were talking about, Steve, the group, gives you other sets of eyes to look at yourself. Our eyes are biased, and so we need non-biased eyes. And so you find men that you trust, men that, are not there to compete with you subtly. And so they're going to tell you things, that lift themselves up and put you down, but men who really want the best for you. And so they're willing to be honest, and they're willing to see you in a non-biased way, and in a way that in essence says, I'm going to require you to be a man. And when somebody requires you to be a man, and there's part of you that knows it, and there's part of you that's angry at them for requiring it, then there's something there to be seen, and that we need to pay attention to. But I think just in terms of how we come to see these things, we need to ask God to give us eyes, and we need to have other eyes. Part of that prayer, I guess, is not just our own eyes, but that God would bring other eyes that are non-biased, that would not be silent but speak to us.
Absolutely. I will say that the challenge of the men in my group, and this is just encouragement for anybody that's watching here live or afterwards. My personal story is I joined a group, and then I left the group for a period of time, and then I rejoined the group. And the reason for me leaving that group, they were excuses. They were excuses to sort of retreat into my own life and not have that accountability of men in my life. And it was one of the worst things that I did in the last 10 years of my life, because you know, when things were going on, and I just thought, you know, I'm just going to focus on getting this done. I need less distractions and less time outside the home. I need to do these things. It didn't help me. And actually, I didn't realize it until one of my brothers in that group called me up and said, hey, you want to go grab a coffee? Do you want to do something? And lovingly asked me that pointed question about being accountable to who I am as a man. And so the group does, I think, Scott, to your point, drive an engagement in my manhood that I don't have without it, you know, because it's a group of loving men, not challenging me to be, you know, masculine for world's sake, but to be masculine in God's vision. So it's definitely good.
And I think also when you're, one of the things that you said from the very beginning, Steve, is that, gosh, I'm not alone in this, you know, that this has been a struggle. One of the things you find is that the legacy of Adam is something that we can't escape because it's part of our reality. You know, not only is the world broken, but we're broken. We're not adequate to be what we, you know, were created to be. And so we think that we still should be adequate, that there's something wrong with me because I can't. So the more you're around men and begin to understand that we really do live in a broken world that's hostile against us, and we're broken men and we're powerless to fix it. And you begin to not feel shame, you know, in regards to our inadequacy. You begin to just be okay with it. It's sad because it reflects something broken that was meant to be good. But it's not something I have to hide. And you know, when we feel that, when we refuse to accept the legacy of Adam, that the world is broken and we can't change it because we're broken, we can't change ourselves because we're inadequate. When we refuse to accept that, that then shapes our story, because our story then is all about hiding those parts of us that are inadequate. But once you begin to see that with other men, you can begin to be okay with the brokenness. And suddenly it doesn't take away the frustration of it, but it does take away the energy of the shame that says, somehow I got to hide this. Somehow I can't be okay with this. And I just find that it makes dealing with myself and dealing with conflict with my wife, with my family, with spouse, our friends, it takes a lot of the edge off it, because guess what? This is just, we're broken. This is what broken people do, and men are inadequate, and men can't fix things. I want to, but I can't. And when we begin to accept that, we can exhale, and now we can begin to put God at the center and begin to see things differently.
That's good. That's good. So that was really the only question we had, Scott, there, and I appreciate the additional comments and commentary. And as I said, I'm going to go back and rewatch this and rewatch the entire series. You know, being on the technical, you know, running things side, it's good to go back and just revisit it. So these recordings that are going to be out on YouTube, plus the manual, plus my men's group going through it, I think it will help to set it in stone for me. One thing that I did want to point out, Randy had mentioned in the comments for everybody, and this is just something that I just felt was valuable to add just before we end today. And that is that we have time, we still have slots available in the September 25th through 27th story weekend. So, you know, share that with your friends. If you're not sure what story weekend is, please, by all means, put a comment in the video or the replay below, send us an email, reach out to AHM Connect, and we will share with you what a story weekend is. I can tell you from personal experience, it is a life-changing opportunity. So with that, I'm going to actually just share a video, Scott, unless you have any other closing thoughts.
Nope.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to take over the screen, men, and I'm going to share some content here with you. Just a quick video clip. And after that, we will end the live stream. Thank you guys for joining us this morning. We'll see you next week for the final AHM CORE live stream. There.